I was once at a funeral at the old seminary chapel at Virginia Seminary in Alexandria. And even though I'm tempted to say it was just a few years ago, I looked it up and it's been 10 years since that chapel burned down. So this must have been 12, 15 years ago. I'm sure some of you knew that building, but it doesn't really matter. The only thing you need to understand if you don't know the building is that this chapel was essentially a freestanding 19th century church, meaning that there really wasn't anything in the building that wasn't church. So there was a little addition or two. There were some bathrooms tacked on from when indoor plumbing became a thing, but there were no corridors, no hallways, offices, gathering spaces. It was just a church. So basically, you were either in the church or you were outside. So when I arrived at this funeral, there were a lot of people outside. Walking some distance from where I had parked, I perceived that I was about to be directed to join that large group of people who were outside, and we were to be escorted into some nearby building where we would have access, in those days before high-speed internet video, to a closed-circuit television feed of this funeral. Now, for whatever psychological reason, I am usually the guy who ends up holding the door for so many people that they run out of whatever it is people are coming for before I ever get inside. I can be so pathologically afraid of looking like a jerk that I'm gonna roll by that open parking space as if I'm going somewhere else, even though I'm obviously there before you and I'm pretty sure that you're already leaving anyway. But this day at Virginia Seminary was different. And I remembered a valuable lesson that my father had taught me when I was a child. His mother, my grandmother, was in the hospital. My dad was supposed to be dropping something off for her, clothes or a book or something that she'd left at home. He was going to visit later, or maybe he'd already visited, but I can't remember. But right now, he was in a hurry. So he pulled up to the main entrance of the hospital and told me he'd wait in the car while I ran whatever it was up to her room. And I knew exactly where the room was because we had visited the day before. But I looked at my dad in the driver's seat and we looked at each other and we both knew perfectly well that I was way too young to be strolling around in the hospital all by myself. And he looked at me and said, "Keep your eyes down, look at the floor, walk fast, and act like you know where you're going." I have applied that lesson in all kinds of situations since then. But I have to say that before that day at Virginia Seminary, I never imagined that I would apply it while wearing a clerical collar and trying to get inside a church. I knew the building, I knew it well, I'd been there many times. So I put my head down, I walked purposely through this large crowd of people, most of whom undoubtedly knew the deceased much better than I did, and into the chapel where I knew there would be absolutely no room to squeeze into a pew. I sort of pretended not to hear or understand what the ushers were saying, and I made my way into a corner where I stood looking solemn and giving the bulletin my full attention so as to be virtually unapproachable. Did not know the deceased especially well, was not deeply grief-stricken, but I had reasons that I felt I should be at this funeral. And I had no intention of spending most of a day driving to Alexandria and back to sit on a folding chair under fluorescent lights and watch a funeral on television. But here we are, for the second year in a row, celebrating Easter remotely, on television essentially, virtual Easter. And in order to make any sense of what we're doing here, with me here in this church, where there's all kinds of room in the pews, and you at home, some of you in your bathrobes, some sipping coffee, some checking the news or Instagram or email on some other screen, to make any sense out of this, we need to take stock of what's real and what's virtual and what the difference is. Our liturgy is virtual, our worship is real, our gathering is virtual, our fellowship is real, our Easter service is virtual, our participation in resurrection life is real. Mark tells us that the women rose early to go to the tomb. They intended to anoint a dead body, an act of mourning, an act of love, an act of respect. But don't forget that they, like us, absolutely expected to find a dead body, nothing other and nothing more. And if they'd found that body, they would have done the things that all of us tend to do following the death of someone we love. They would have shared memories, told stories, recalled lessons and sayings, love given and received. They might even have said things like, "I feel he's still with me." And like us, when we say those things, they would have meant it. But that's not how the story goes. Mark tells us that they were seized with terror and amazement. Now, death can be terrifying ahead of time. When you yourself are staring into the face of death, or when you're walking toward death with someone you love, that is terrifying. But after the burial, when it's time for the stories and the remembering, that's not terrifying. If they had found the body and anointed it and shared stories and showed their respect as an act of mourning, they would not have been terrified. Now, this is where it gets tricky, because Mark leaves us and those women with mystery. They were terrified. The angel tells them Jesus has gone ahead to Galilee. They can't possibly know what that could mean. But Galilee is a place they've been before. So there's brand new mystery and pointing toward the familiar at the same time. There's a lot of talk often in the church, especially on Good Friday, sometimes even on Christmas, about the connection between Good Friday and Christmas, about the incarnation, about God coming into human flesh to inhabit human flesh. And we can take that in when we're ready. We can take in the fact that for God to come into our time and space as a human being at Christmas means that unless he's a magical, immortal human body, that there will be Good Friday, there will be a death. But the temptation is then to spiritualize resurrection, to say that when the tomb is empty, somehow incarnation has been demoted, because what God is all about really is that life in heaven, away from earth, away from the physical, away from the earthly. And it's tempting, or it's easy to tell ourselves a story that anything to do with Jesus was physical and earthly before they put him in that tomb. And then after that, it was no longer physical and earthly. After that, anything to do with Jesus is about a story that takes place in the sky. But what the angel tells the women is, he has gone ahead of you to Galilee. Back where you started, back where you first encountered him, back where the story took place before you came here and all this horrible stuff happened in Jerusalem. There's something in that about the spiritual journey of the Christian life always being back at the beginning, always being, even in a brand new mystery, back at the beginning, always in a brand new mystery, being in the same relationship with God that we've always been in. It's an intensification of incarnation, of the idea that God lives and breathes among us, in us, through us, between us, in our human relationships here on this physical earth. Resurrection life is an intensification of incarnation. It's not a demotion of incarnation. We go looking like those women for bodies from the past to remind us where we've come from, what we've known, what we have learned along the way. And when God comes to us in moments of clarity about the ways in which resurrection life suffuses our lives, suffuses life on earth, when we encounter those moments, sometimes we're not sure that we understand how to get back to Galilee, or we're not sure that's where we ought to be going anyway, because that's where we came from. We're not sure we belong there. We're not sure that we belong in that resurrection life. And so it can be tempting not to follow. It can be tempting to say, resurrection is purely a spiritual idea. It's a philosophy. It's not to do with me, my body, my human relationships, how I live here now on this earth. But the angel tells the women at the tomb, he has gone ahead of you to Galilee, a place you know well. You know how to get there. You know how to live there. You have been there before with him. He has been there with you. He will be with you when you arrive again. Not everybody goes. But when God calls you to resurrection life in Galilee, the familiar place, the place that you've already come from, walk with purpose. Even if you're not sure where you're going, walk quickly. Put your head down, follow, act like you know where you're going. You have already been there. Amen.